You mentioned the imperial cult and the early church, basically how this early church developed out of the imperial cult. Are there any sources showing, I guess, correspondence between the imperial cult and the early Christian church? Or because I'm just thinking, what was it like under Constantine when this church basically overtook the imperial cult? Obviously, the imperial cult would know that Jesus, this Christ thing, is based off of Caesar, worship of Caesar. Do we have any sources or anything regarding that?
No, there, no. I mean, that would have that would have been a little too telling if they had actual, documents and things describing the relationship between the imperial cult and Christianity. Um, what you have is basically the facts of history, is though they aren't really that many. But I mean, this is one of the reasons why New Testament scholarship is sort of constantly, in search of theories, to explain things. So they don't have enough data points. They're just really not much. But I would point to a couple of things. One is the Christian Flavi.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, this is critical. Is that the first Christians that anyone has? There's any historical documentation, and the documentation is pretty weak, but it's not zero. In other words, you have inscriptions, you have the names of churches, and there are books, like the Acts of Nero Synaculus, and these are part of the early Christian lore. They're pretty fabulous.
Hmm.
The documents are the literature is, it doesn't appear to be like a historical piece, but it does make the claim that the first Christians, the earliest Christians, were all members of the imperial family or their employees. So you get Priscilla and
Hmm.
Flavia Domitilla is really famous. She had the first catacomb, um, and there were, I mean, she was either the daughter or niece, of Caesar, and so a Flavian family member. And anyway, there's a whole. I would just, if people are curious, just type in Christian Flavi, and you can see how many there were. These are the first Christians. So this is a kind of statement. It's not written, but it is obvious that they could not exist without the nature of early Christianity that I posit. I mean, there's just no other way you'd have so many members of the imperial family becoming the first Christians if the family hadn't been involved somehow in its creation. And so,
Hmm.
so there's that. And then the other thing I point to is Constantine's grave. I mean, what he did is he created a real fancy place for his body to be laid after he was dead, and
Hmm.
he surrounded it with or he attempted to surround it with the bodies of the 12 apostles. So
Hmm.
he literally put himself in the center and had his plan was to dig them up and put them all around him. He,
Hmm.
he, he didn't get too far with his plan, but it's actually recorded by Eusebius that this was what Constantine was trying to do. So, the people have drawn the obvious conclusion that, he was trying to say he was Caesar, he was God, Jesus, he was the Christ. This is why he had the disciples all around him. So these are sort of connections between the imperial cult and Christianity, which are, sort of extrapolations, but um, are, are the interpretive framework I give makes them perfectly logical, and the relationship between the imperial cult and Christianity is without contradiction. In other
Hmm.
words, you couldn't really, if you have the imperial cult and then you have all these members of Caesar's households and their employees are Christians, well, how is that possible? You
Hmm.
see, why would they contradict the imperial cult, which is basically the family religion,
Hmm.
um, unless Christianity was in fact a very, just a cryptic part of the imperial cult? So, um, and then there's the language in the Gospels. There's quite a few technical terms of the imperial cult, which only really appear in Roman literature in the imperial cult. I mean, even like gospel or logos,
Hmm.
very unusual words that appear in the New Testament and are common inside the literature of the imperial cult. So that would be another, kind of connection between the two organizations. But they're really, as far as the document that you're searching for, it doesn't exist. And the only hope I think of it ever coming to light would be if they are able to translate all of Pliny. They have in, I think it's Herculaneum, that his villa was buried
Hmm.
by volcanic eruption. And I'm sure he was involved in the production of the Gospels. And so that would be the one place you might get an archaeologic miracle where you'd get
Hmm.
a description by Pliny of what he was doing.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the Vatican has quite a bit of control over the excavation, so we'll
Hmm.
see if it ever
Yeah.
comes
Okay. I just want to ask a quick question because we were talking about the Gospel of John.